first episode of Dog with a Bone podcast, The Murder of John Burnside. My name is Melissa Sandberg, and I am a civil investigator whose passion is to help cold cases get another investigation and bring attention back to a cold case. My previous case was out of Parkersburg, West Virginia. I was investigating the murder of Judith Petty, who was found on her family property in the cellar after the fire was extinguished.
It's been 15 years since Judith Petty died in a structure fire at her family's farm. Now there's new movement in the investigation. I'm joined by Melissa Sandberg, who is part of her cold case team investigation and has been working with law enforcement to bring Petty justice.
When investigating a cold case, you can become very close to the family of the victim. That is what happened for me and the Petty family. Judy's parents would express over and over again how thankful they were for all that was done in Judy's case. Here's Mrs. Petty.
You worked awfully hard on this case and continue to work on it, and you've done more than the police ever did. And I am so thankful that we had you on our team.
Unfortunately, Judy's dad died in February of 2024. Well, to be more specific, he died when I was on the airplane making my way to Parkersburg. His death was not expected, meaning he was doing fine until the day I flew out. I landed and made my way to their house when I got the news. I did not make it in time. This is actually part of the investigation nobody really knows about. I was devastated. I cried for hours. And yet the next day I put on my game face and went to do an interview with WTAP, and then the detective and I in Judy's case paid a visit to someone we had been wanting to speak to. The next day, I was on the road to Marysville. My heart was so broken, and it was hard to keep my focus on starting a new case, but I did my best. If you are looking for more details on Judy's case, you can visit the Safe Haven podcast, The Unsolved Murder of Judith Petty. In this first season of Dog with a Bone, I am investigating the murder of 32-year-old John Burnside. He was found in his home on December 11th, 1993 in Marysville, Ohio, just 10 hours after a call to the police to report his home was broken into. John had a plastic trash bag duct taped around his head. Initially, the manner of death was a suicide, but later changed to a homicide. People often ask or wonder how one picks a case out of the thousands of unsolved cases. For me, I think it's a lot like how pets choose their owner. Cases choose you. I remember talking with James from the Hide and Seek podcast, who has become my mentor and cheerleader in this new space I find myself in. Here is James.
Hey Mel, just wanted to say that I got your message and wanted to share that I know that the struggle to find the right cases is real, and that's completely normal. Just try to remember that finding the right case won't just fall into your lap. It's one of those things you have to seek out to try to find all the information before committing to that case. Try not to get discouraged if things aren't moving as quickly as you'd like. This process takes time, and you've got the passion and skills to see it through. So just take it one step at a time. Remember that the perfect case is out there waiting for you. I'm here to help you. If you need anything, you've got this. Stay focused, my friend, and keep pushing forward.
And he was right. I had that same feeling that I had in Judy's case, where I felt it in my heart. I was not confident that I would ever have that same feeling again, but I did. Once I knew Bernie's case would be the one, I began researching to see what I could find. I came across the flyer from the Union County Sheriff's Office. Now, Many of you who are true crime followers are familiar with the Patty Atkins case. For those who do not know, Patty Atkins went missing in 2001 from the Honda manufacturing plant and was never seen again. John also worked at Honda, but more on that later. So when I mentioned Marysville, Patty's case is the one everyone asks me about when I give the location. This is one of the main reasons I selected John's case because nobody was familiar with it. But first, just so we are all on the same page, I'll be referring to John as Bernie throughout this season. Everyone in the town knew and loved him as Bernie, so it only seems fitting to call him Bernie. There's another individual, John, who will come into factor in later episodes. So it will be easier for distinction purposes to refer to our John as Bernie. I continued my search for information on Bernie's case. I realized there wasn't much information to find. I checked out a Facebook page and saw a group, Who Killed John Burnside? This page had only 22 followers. 22! I was shocked and thought everyone had forgotten about Bernie. Who was fighting for justice? Fate had ultimately decided for me. I was headed to West Virginia for an already scheduled trip to see the Petty family. So I looked up how far it was to Marysville from Parkersburg. 3-hour drive? No problem. It was time to pay a visit to Marysville.
So, good morning. Saying good morning to myself. You know what you do on these investigations? You talk a lot to yourself when you're by yourself. Look at me rhyming. So, it's a very gloomy, there's no sun in the clouds here. I'm traveling from Parkersburg, West Virginia to Marysville, Ohio. I've never been through Ohio, so this is a first for me. But it is very gloomy out on this Saturday morning. All the trees are dead, the grass is dead, the sky is gray and cloudy, and just there's not a lot of sunshine at all here.
As I continued talking to myself, I became even more interested in the circumstances surrounding Bernie's murder. Why did Marysville Police Department rule it a suicide, but then changed it to a homicide? When? Why? What happened in those 10 hours after the police left? And why does Union County have the case? All of these questions were swirling in my head. Before my brain could start to overflow, Interstate 33 reached the end of its course, and spread out before me was the small town of Marysville. Marysville is about 33 miles outside of Columbus, and its population in 1993 was 10,659. Since then, the population has grown to about 29,000. As I made my way into town, I really could not help but think I was arriving on a TV set from the Hallmark Channel at Christmas time. All I was missing was the snow. The sidewalks were all brick. There were lights hanging from the street. There was music in the air. The stores were small town businesses that had been there for years, if not decades. I drove a few times around the block trying to find a spot to park. I had forgotten how to parallel park. Once I parked, it was time for me to brave the cold. Okay. It is Saturday, about 12:30 here in Marysville, Ohio. You can hear the wind. It is so cold. I am a Florida girl who is freezing. So right now I'm going to go into the bar that Bernie used to hang out in all the time. I was meeting with Darren, who owned Stephen's Lounge. His mom owned it at the time, where Bernie was a regular customer and had actually been at Stephen's the night of his murder. I entered Stephen's and was so happy to get out of the cold and warm up. The bar had just opened and the air was filled with pine sol smell. The bartender had just finished cleaning before opening. My first thought when I entered was, I could see myself hanging out here if I lived in Marysville. The bar was actually larger than I expected from the outside. Darren is a middle-aged man born and raised in Marysville. He greeted me with a warm smile and offered me a seat at the bar. Darren does not seem to be as bothered by the cold as I was. He was better prepared for the day. He was dressed comfortably and wearing a hooded sweatshirt. If I had to guess by his clothing, I'd say he's an Ohio State fan. Darren tells me he was young at the time of Bernie's murder, so he didn't know Bernie, but he does recall speaking with Bernie's dad on multiple occasions. Bernie's dad never gave up investigating his son's murder. Here's Darren.
I worked at Steffens for 35 years. Bernie's dad used to come in Steffens a lot. We would talk a lot. And, I ended up being a dad after, so I couldn't imagine what he was going through,
Right.
with the whole tragedy and everything. His dad would always come in. He had a little notebook and he would write stuff in it, and he would go around and interview people, and he would ask he'd stand out on the corner and just ask random people questions, if they knew his son and if they had any information. And he always, there was always 3 names that he always threw around, and I think maybe they were friends of Bernie's.
Okay.
And he always said that they knew more than they were letting on,
So his dad was more of the investigator than what the investigators were doing.
It seemed like it. I mean, I never heard of any active investigation going on.
Yeah, I can't find a lot on his murder, which is very rare. It's basically whatever the sheriff's department just put out, but there's not a lot of news articles, media coverage, whatnot. So it sounds like his dad was trying to figure out who killed his son for years, and it weighed on him. I
think anybody that did know about it would want to resolve to know what happened and the person, the perpetrator or whatever.
Yeah.
Justice, I guess, because obviously we're a small town. There hasn't been a whole lot of murders here, or a whole lot, very many homicides, and to have several cold cases in a small town,
It's weird. Yeah.
First they tried to say that it was a suicide.
Right. I saw that. And do you know why they thought it was a suicide?
It seemed practically impossible to be a suicide, so I don't know why they would have ever thought that.
Yeah.
I believe it's a long time ago, but they found his safe in the front yard. Like somebody tried to steal a safe. Some people say they tried to make it look like a burglary.
Who's they? Tried to make it look like
whoever did it. Whoever murdered him.
Mm-hmm.
I heard they were looking for a black book because he kept all his associates in a black book.
What did he say about who the names that mentioned? What did he say he was getting or hearing?
All he said was, all he would always say is, I believe the 3 names that he would always mention was, I believe, friends. But, he'd come in here. I talked to him dozens of times. He just never gave up. He said his marriage was on the rocks because he couldn't let go. And, because he would come here by himself. His wife was never here.
Okay.
So I don't know if they ended up splitting up or not, but he would come and he would be here for pretty much the day. And like I said, he would go around asking people questions. He always had this little notebook. He would write stuff in and, wish I could think of that other name. I don't know. But like I said, those were just people that he felt could point him in the right direction. Maybe they were afraid, or maybe, they knew more.
Bernie's dad died in December 2022 without seeing justice served to those responsible for Bernie's murder. But what he did do was leave all of his notes for us to pick up right where he left off. And boy, does he have a lot. As Darren and I continued chatting, two other longtime residents of Marysville, Vicki and Eula, arrived. I connected online with them about Bernie's case, and both have been extremely helpful.
Here to talk to Melissa.
Are you? Which one are you?
Hello, Vicki.
Hi, Vicki. Nice to meet you. Oh, move my stuff. We're just chit-chatting.
Yeah.
I didn't think you guys were going to be open.
I was at the wrong place.
Oh, was you?
Yes. He's like, no, we're open at noon. I'm like, no, I'm here. No one's here. The bartender's up. No. I'm at the wrong place.
I'm going to take a nice Coke.
So, yeah, we were just talking about Vicki.
$1.25.
And we haven't been able to reach her yet.
Oh, yeah.
Just another thing to know about me besides parallel parking, I'm directionally challenged.
Is Dad's name John also?
I thought it was, but
Because I think his dad still owns his house.
Everyone gets caught up on how they know each other, and the conversation turns back to Bernie and the unsolved murders in Marysville.
So tell me, what the community is like in Marysville in regards to unsolved homicides. What's your opinion on them?
They don't get sold.
They don't.
They definitely don't get sold.
how many is there? Like 4?
Yeah, there's like 4 or 5 that haven't been sold.
You've got the Patty Atkins,
The sheriff,
the sheriff.
Harry Wolf.
Yeah,
The sheriff?
Wolf.
There's a sheriff.
The sheriff that
killed.
was killed here.
I looked up this information. The sheriff was murdered in 1981, and his case was actually solved in 1983. Stanley Penn was tried and convicted. He died in 2020 at the age of 70. There are currently 5 unsolved cases in Union County, and that includes missing person cases. The last unsolved homicide was in 2004 of 2 little boys. To put this into perspective, the size of Union County, it is made up of 50 cities and towns. Population total is around 67,000. One of the positive sides of working a cold case is getting to know the victim through the family and friends' eyes. Eula shares with me her interactions with Bernie when she was a kid.
I remember growing up, we used to go around for trick or treat, and we'd go to Bernie's house. He was always the one that would hand out full-size candy bars. And because of that, we would circle the block and go back. And he knew we'd already been there, but he would still hand us another one and just laugh and smile. We would make at least 3 or 4 trips by there every Halloween.
This is classic Bernie. There are more details to share about our conversation, but those will come in later episodes. But for now, I thank them for their time in sharing what they remember about Bernie, his case, and the town. I really could have stayed and hung out there for hours. However, it was time for me to head back to Parkersburg to say goodbye to Mr. Petty.
All right, so I am headed back to Parkersburg, just wrapping up my visit here in Marysville. And I learned a lot at Stefan's Lounge.
I feel like I'm no longer talking to myself, but to all of you.
It was a good first visit, and, definitely a small town back in 1993. Everyone mentioning the corruption that took place. And, now it's 2024. So they have a chance to turn it all around and do right. And, heartbreaking to learn that Bernie's dad felt like he had to investigate himself.
This is a common theme I hear a lot from families. They express how they feel if they don't pick up the investigation, the case won't move forward, especially cold cases. They feel forgotten and will often take on the burden of trying to generate new leads and information. This takes a toll, as it did on Bernie's dad. Victimology is critical when reviewing any case to get a better understanding of the victim and those around them at the time of the murder. Typically, the last week of a victim's life leading up to their death will provide good insight into events happening. To understand Bernie and who he was as a person, I needed to talk to those closest to him. I reached out to Gloria, Bernie's mom, and we chatted for hours. As Gloria and I got to know each other, I could not help but comment on her hair. I love your hair.
Oh, thank you.
It's very colorful. Is it reddish?
I use dark brown.
Dark brown. Okay. It looks really nice.
Well, really no, it's dark red, auburn red with a little bit of brown in it.
Okay, that's where the kind of the red tintish is coming from.
Yeah, it helps to keep the red in,
I explained to Gloria my background and why I want to help find justice for her son and family. Gloria then begins to share what she remembers of Bernie as a baby. Her whole demeanor changed, and she could not help but grin ear to ear.
Oh, he was such an easy baby, easy child to take care of. He would cry if you looked at him and frowned. You never have to scold him because you had to be careful and not even act like it because he would cry.
Oh, so very sensitive to that?
Very sensitive, yes.
Yeah.
And if we were at the beach, he wouldn't even crawl off into the sand. And when I put him on a blanket in the grass out back, I knew he'd stay there because he didn't like the feel of the grass. He was so sensitive in every way. And he has slight cerebral palsy. And back then, we knew they gave him too much oxygen or something, but you couldn't prove anything like that either. So he had one eye, and we didn't know that till when he was just a toddler, and he kept looking down in his glass, with one eye. And that's when I knew something was wrong. Took him to the eye doctor. Then he started wearing glasses as a toddler.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and then he didn't even talk or walk or anything till about 15 months. And I took him to speech clinic then for quite some time then. And they said that he had a high IQ. He could talk, answer things, but he couldn't, his coordination was off because of the slight cerebral palsy.
According to the Mayo Clinic's website, cerebral palsy is a group of conditions that affect movement and posture. It is caused by damage that occurs to the developing brain, most often before birth. Symptoms appear during infancy or preschool years and vary from mild to serious. Children with cerebral palsy may have exaggerated reflexes. The arms, legs, and trunk may appear floppy. Symptoms also include irregular posture, movements that can't be controlled, a walk that's not steady, or some combination of these. Did he ever get down because of his disability or having cerebral palsy? Did he ever say or show anything of how it wasn't fair or he was feeling bad because of it or people made fun of him or anything like that?
We never talked about it. So when he was with me up until 12 years old, no, never.
Okay, it was normal.
We just acted like he's a normal child.
As you heard from Gloria, Bernie grew up in a home where having cerebral palsy was not seen as a weakness, but just the opposite. Being diagnosed with cerebral palsy at such a young age in the early 60s, when not a lot of information was known, Bernie and his family did not let this impact their daily lives. Gloria ended up moving to California when Bernie was 12, and Bernie remained in Marysville with his dad, and eventually on his own. Gloria and Bernie continued to stay in contact and would visit during the holidays. One of the most difficult parts of an investigation is asking a loved one to remember the day their life changed for the worst. These conversations have to be handled with grace and an understanding on my part of what I'm asking of them. I have worked in hospice for the past 17 years, so handling difficult conversations such as these does help guide me in being comfortable with death and the trauma loved ones face. For example, I've had many difficult conversations with moms and dads where we have to discuss plans for the holidays. I had a mom who had 2 young kids. We had to have the difficult conversation about Christmas and possibly that she would not be here. Knowing this, I worked with her to order presents online that she was able to pick out herself. The patient did not make it to the holiday, but her children did get presents from Mom. It was having these types of conversations that have helped me in working cold cases. Our conversation turns to that day, a parent's worst nightmare, the phone call. So, talk me through when you got that phone call about his murder, his death. What were you doing? Where were you at? What was going on in your world?
I was in the car because it was getting close to Christmas. And so we left New Orleans and came there, and Polly and Steve picked us up at Dayton, Ohio. Okay. And we were in the car when she said, Johnny's dead.
I'm so sorry. She told you that?
And she said that, and I screamed, and of course the kids were scared then because Grammy screamed. And I just wanted to get out of that car and run through the fields. And of course couldn't. And it was just such a shock. And then of course I had to go to bed, and I had a horrible headache and was sick then, and had to stay in bed until the funeral and all.
Yeah. When was the last time that you talked to John before that happened? Do you remember?
I talked to him probably the first part of December because we told him we were coming and we were having Christmas together, all of us, because we were going to fly back to California. So we wouldn't be there on Christmas Day, but we wanted to all have Christmas together.
Okay. And was he excited, looking forward to it?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, he always was. And when they found money change in his safe, and he had a lot of change in there in a jar. That's how he bought all the little kids' Christmas gifts, and he was saving all that money to buy the Christmas gifts.
This is important because it sounds like Bernie was looking forward to the upcoming visit and the holiday with the family. Did you ever hear from them? Did they ever call you?
No.
You never heard from the cops? They never called you, expressed condolences?
No.
Isn't this investigation 101? Said, hey, we'd like to interview, get to know Bernie, what's going on? Nothing.
Nothing. Never.
So even when they ruled it a suicide and quickly it was deemed not a suicide, there was no follow-up as the mom?
Nope. Never heard his word.
In all these years, you've never heard?
Never heard a word. Never.
I'm still shocked and disturbed, really, that no officer investigating Bernie's murder, or even when it was a suicide, reached out to the mother of the victim. Gloria and I end our conversation, and she shares her hope for the future.
I had been hoping and praying for something like this for years. We would love to have the case been solved because we had a feeling of who did it in the first place, you know.
The next people I reached out to are Paula, Bernie's sister, and Paula's husband, Steve. They live in Ohio and would see Bernie on a regular basis. They sat down with me and provided a lot of information on Bernie as a young adult.
There's 3 of us in the family, my sister Pamela, and John is 6 years younger than I. He worked at Honda, so he always worked to support himself because my dad had moved him and moved to Phoenix, and he didn't want to be there, and they didn't accept his high school record the same, and he had to take other classes. So he didn't like it, and he came back to Marysville and then Dad set him up living with some friends. So he was kind of on his own since he was 17 or so, maybe 16.
I also asked Steve and Paula about Bernie being diagnosed with cerebral palsy and how that affected him physically, if at all.
Not really. I mean, he was just slower, a little bit slower moving, but no, he could move his arms, he could walk. I never saw him run or anything like that. But
so he was a small guy, is that?
He was small, yes.
Barely 5'8" and very thin, always thin. Not muscular whatsoever.
Bernie was not some big bad dude who was going around starting trouble. The physical description they provided Bernie does match up with the definition of having cerebral palsy. It is important for us to know these details when reviewing the murder, and if we are looking at one or two suspects. And that's what people said too, even with they said on the left side a little bit, like he walked like a little bit of like a limp, nothing like it would notice, like you would pick it up, like he was just a little slower, but very, very friendly, people seem to take to him, How was his social circle in high school?
I don't know.
Okay.
He was just kind of on his own back then. When his dad set him up, to live with these other friends, John was still in school. He was still in high school.
Finished high school.
But these friends kind of, they seemed to really like him and, kind of watched out for him. And John had a job at the local market there. And, he was making money, but he was supporting himself. And then with the help of his friends, able to live. And then he got the job at Honda then after he graduated high school. And, then he was making good money and he was able to buy his house.
This is a common theme when talking about Bernie. Everyone says Bernie was easygoing, friendly, worked hard, and that people took to him. He had a lot of people in the community who cared and looked out for him. They would ensure nobody messed with him. I like to think the motto was, don't mess with the Bern. And did you ever know him in his adult life to have girlfriends or dating anybody or anything like that?
No.
Okay.
No. He passed at 32, and I don't know if he ever was on a date.
I asked others who went to high school with Bernie or hung out with him, and no one remembers any relationships. Bernie had lots of friends, but as far as anyone remembers, he never had a romantic relationship. If anyone knows someone or if you dated Bernie, I would love to hear from you. Paula and Steve then share with me on how impressed they were with Bernie's taste and organization for a young guy. I am too.
And he totally furnished his home. I mean, it would have been something I could live in instead of, so he was that way. That's kind of big for how guys can live. Mm-hmm. You know what I'm saying?
And he had an office in his house with a desk, and he had a Rolodex. I was impressed with it. He had all his names and addresses. Files, and he paid his bills in there. And I mean, he just kept up with things.
This will become important later.
So, I'm going to say he's clean, efficient, and like nice things. Like he had a new sofa, a new lounge chair, nice end tables, nice wood and glass end tables, things that I would pick out.
He picked out.
Yeah, he did all that. So that was different for a very young guy on his own. Mm-hmm. He wasn't lazy about ever working. He He always had money.
Steve tells me about the bar Bernie built.
So then when he had bought the house, he had his 3 or 4 friends, and they all got together and they built a bar. They had a game room in there, and so it was kind of a hangout for his friends, and
the light up beer lights and things like that a 21-year-old would have, but like the rest of the house, just.
And I heard about this bar, that he was so proud of it, that he built this bar himself.
Yep.
At the end of our call, Paul and Steve expressed appreciation and that feeling of hope. As Polly said to me, she felt she was in a bit of a haze, and hoping this time the truth would come out. After learning all I have about Bernie, he was just a young man living his life and overcame challenges. He did not let this get him down. Bernie pushed through and achieved great things at Honda. He even won an award for submitting an idea for a change in a practice or policy that Honda ended up implementing. Bernie was out with his friends like any other Friday night, but this time, he was murdered before sunrise. I realized at this point where I needed to start the investigation: the burglary. Welcome to the Dog Pound, where I dig for the truth of what happened on December 11th, 1993. Next time on Dog with a Bone. About that, but I do want to see if there's any, how much coke he would possibly keep in his safe at a time. Do you?
An ounce at best.
Okay.
Yeah, it's not like he's dealing keys or nothing like that. It was nothing.
Yeah.
Nothing like that. An ounce. I mean, if he had 2 ounces, it was a big deal.
Okay.
So an ounce, it wasn't like he was some kingpin, honcho, cocaine dealer, nothing like that.
It was raining cats and dogs, and it was in a wheelbarrow, apparently. And they were trying to wheel it around the house, and it sunk.
Did they tell you the reason that they wanted to steal the safe?
They wanted the cocaine. From what I understood, the wheelbarrow sunk, and they came back to the bar.
Dog with a Bone is hosted, investigated, produced, and written by Melissa Sandberg. Additional writing by Caitlin Sandberg. Edited by Jason Sandberg. Theme music by Alex Yukich. Dog with a Bone is a Sasquatch production. A special thank you to James Basinger and Sarah Jo for their support and additional editing. Also, I want to thank Vicky and Eula for their continued help on this case. I could not do it without you.